I'm going to, when I talk about roles and responsibilities, and obviously in the title I said with RACI, because that's the one that I'm going to focus on. I will touch on some of the different models that are available, but it just seems that RACI is again and again is the most common one that people use, or if not use, they at least recognize as a responsibility model. So as I said, take you through some of the different things. I will touch on the functionality. What I will do is finish off, though, a little bit on the some of the analytics that we have around responsibility modeling, and I will also just show you the exporting a report at the end as well, and just how I've used the report exports. So there's a little bit of work that I do in Excel outside of Spark. So I thought what I'd do is just start off with some of the most common uses, I guess, that we've seen for this. I suppose the most common one is project management. Most common use case I've seen for RACI certainly is, when building out a project plan, and then agreeing what the different responsibilities are for the different actors in there. Now, interestingly, that Claudia mentioned before, being one of her favorite topics. I know one of the organizations that Claudia worked at, essentially what they were doing is they were using RACI on processes, but they were basically large projects that they would run. And so they had a standard process for running the project, and then running it over and over again. So it's like a large complex project, but you would repeat multiple times, maybe in different regions, different countries, or different locations. So again, really, really useful for that. I think just in general, I had this comment made to me last week, so a couple of weeks ago, that actually using UPN in Spark itself is pretty good for mapping out projects, regardless of whether it's something that you're going to use repeatably or not. Because again, it has, UPN has the ability to break processes down hierarchically very easy. It mirrors quite closely a work breakdown structure. So if you use that type of approach for thinking about the work in a project, then again it lends itself to that quite nicely. It also relates relatively well to the product breakdown structure as well. And in fact, if you think about how UPN works, where you've got activities, so the steps in the process as being activities which you can lay out sequentially, and the fact that you then do outputs for each of the activities, the output side of it is a lot more, is more like the product side. So in some ways what you get is a combination of a work breakdown and a product breakdown structure. So regardless of whether you're looking at roles and responsibilities, it's also just a good way to try and think through work that needs to take place in a project and how you might sequence it. Now, I mentioned that a little bit of background on why this functionality is in Spark in the first place, and that it actually came from a number of large transformation programs that some of us were involved in the past, and specifically around organization design. And essentially what we were doing there is trying to, building a new organization for something to deliver a product or service, and then thinking through what are the people that we need in that organization, and using this approach. So defining the processes first, what's the work we need to do, and then going through and applying the roles and responsibilities. We did this at a fairly high level. It essentially allowed us to end up with a set of job descriptions that we were then able to use to either assess against the staff that we already had in the organization, and also to identify the gaps and who we needed to hire. So as I go through this in a second, I've got an example that's loosely based around this. So I'll take you through that and just sort of show you a very high level the steps and how that worked. that's why I want to show you the spreadsheet bit at the end, which is essentially how we then arrived at the job descriptions themselves. And then, of course, the process improvement is a classic one, because often, one of the biggest, I suppose, one of the most common problems that I see in processes. So typically, when you're looking at a process, you're looking for things like handovers between people and teams and departments. That's a common place where things go wrong. Places where things are being done very manually when they could potentially be automated. But for me, one of the top ones there is when you're mapping a process with a team and they either don't know, can't answer the question of who does something, or they can't agree who does something. So sometimes it's like, we don't know who it is, and other times it's like, oh, it's this person. Actually, no, it's not. It's this role over here, or it's that role. And of course, when that happens, that the implications of that, there's numerous implications. But one of the sort of common manifestations of that is where either they want to describe a role as a team, so they can't specifically pick a particular person in a team who's responsible for doing something, or they'll say things like, oh, well, some days it's that role and some days it's this role, but it could also be this role as well. Now, I have had fun with this in the past, where working with teams, where you see a lot of this through a process, and then you will ask a fun question like, do you have trouble getting this work finished on time? And then they all look amazed, going, how did you know that? And if you can't be clear about who's doing something, then often what happens is that it doesn't get done. So everyone thinks someone else is doing it, because it's not clear where the ownership for a particular piece of work lies. So again, really useful in that context. So those are just for me, some of the most common uses of a roles and responsibility model. So just quickly touch on. So I'm just going to touch on the two most common ones that we use. So RACI, obviously, I've mentioned, and that's the one that I'm going to be going through. So very quickly, just to clarify for anyone who's not familiar with RACI here today, what RACI stands for. So it stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consult, and Inform. Now, one of the challenges, and I'll talk about this in a second with the other model I've got here, but one of the challenges often is people disagree on the meaning of responsible and accountable. I've worked with a lot of different organizations that use RACI. Most of them roughly follow the same approach, but I have seen some variance in how they would define what these things mean. I suppose regardless, as long as you've got a standard definition of what they mean, then you should be fine. But basically, responsible is generally, when I talk about this, I talk about the person who's actually responsible for doing the activity. Whereas accountable is the person who's accountable for making sure it's the thing is done, or the work is done. So they might be sitting above the person who's actually doing it, in terms of some sort of reporting lines, and so they'll be accountable for all of the work and making sure it gets done. Again, from a UPN perspective, where we're breaking processes down hierarchically, this is really useful, because we can then set an accountable at a high level in the process, and then in the detail, we'd then use the other responsibility levels. Consult is, again, it's anyone who, while we're doing this work, that we might need to consult in order to complete or to deliver the work. And then inform is anyone who needs to know when the thing is done, so who needs to be informed. The other model I've got here, now there's lots of different models, and in Spark I think we have 3 by default, so RACI, RACI and Rapid are the the ones we've got built into Spark, but you can customize. So if you use something like RASCI or something else, then you can actually build your own responsibility model and use that in here as well. And all of the functionality that I'll show you should all work roughly the same. The other common one that we use that we've used as a team previously is RACI. And so this one we use it, and I called it the international version here, a bit tongue in cheek. But basically, I was saying about teams will often disagree about the meaning of responsible and accountable. When you're using this internationally, one of the challenges is that in many languages, these two words actually translate into the same word. And so it's even more confusing in that context. So RACI is an attempt to try and clarify a little bit more, but has a slightly different, it has a slightly different approach. But basically, R is responsible. So this responsible is a bit more like the accountable that I described in accountable. So it's responsible for making sure the thing is done rather than actually doing it. The doing of the task in this case is the T for task. So that's the person who's actually doing the thing. Now, in addition to those, we've got an authority, and the way we use RACI is the authority is where we call out a decision. So you don't use it all the time, but it's where a single role has the authority to make a key decision in the process. So again, it can be quite useful, especially if you've got problems in the processes around decision making and who's making them. Being able to really call that out clearly is really, really beneficial. I just realized a mistake in my text here, but the S in RACI is support, very similar to the consult. So who do you need to support you to do the work? And then inform is the same. Who do you need to be informed? As I said, I'm going to focus a bit on the RACI one today. So just a few good practices when you're using RACI with Spark and UPN. So first thing, obviously set up the model you want to use. So you would do that within the administration section. So I'll just go to my workspace, go to admin and scroll down. I'm trying to remember where it is. It's going to be here somewhere. I think, does it sit under roles? Yeah, and then there's the responsibility model. So as I said, there's the RACI Rapid RACI. So you need to select which one of those you want as default, and then you have an ability to add a new responsibility model there if you want to. Just a recommendation, it's a good idea not to mix responsibility models within a workspace. So if you are going to use them, think about them early, choose the one that you're going to use, set that as the default, and then use it going forward. It is possible to use multiple ones in a workspace. It's definitely not recommended because it makes the reporting very difficult, but you may, if you are doing that, you can set it on a process by process level which responsibility model you're using. Okay, so actually when you're using it, I kind of alluded to this already, but when you have a detailed view, then we recommend that you use the accountable. So here I've got an example. I've got an activity with a detailed view. So although I might have multiple roles underneath that doing the activities, at this activity here, we'd recommend just putting the accountable. And again, when you come to building your job descriptions later on, this is really useful because you start to then group all of the large bits of work that roles are accountable for. When you go down into that, then here what I've done is broken out. Now you'll notice that in here, I haven't actually used accountable because I've got it in the level above. So remember, with accountable being the person accountable for making sure that the output gets delivered, although they might only be involved in one or two places within the process. So yeah, that, and then the next one is put the responsibilities at the lower level. So it's when you run out of detailed views, that's where you would tend to put the different responsibility levels. One of the things here is you can hide roles on busy processes. So again, I've got a very simple example with some boxes of different responsibilities, but again, before I go on to the last point there, you can often end up with quite a lot of roles against an activity, especially in an org design exercise, because you're looking at it quite early on and you haven't defined all the detailed processes yet. You will often be summarizing processes at quite a high level, so you might have quite a lot of roles against them. You can hide roles. So if you click on the attachment icon so that you open the panel on the left, there is a responsibility section available there, and you can see all of the roles that you've assigned, and you can hide them. So it might be that you want to hide some of the the consults and informs, for example, just to kind of keep your process diagrams tidy. You don't have to do this, it's just you have this ability to do it that I'm showing you. Now, when you do that, you'll see the roles are still associated with the box, so all the reporting, they'll still be there, but then just from a visual perspective, you can then just really refine it to just the ones that you want people to see quite clearly. And the last point there, just in terms of some good practices, is try not to overuse the consults and informs. I have been in some situations where like everyone wants to be informed about everything, so you end up with these huge lists of users putting inform on, and actually you're just taking a huge amount of time by putting them on there and not really adding a huge amount of value. So again, just be sort of mindful of that. It might be important to go through that exercise. It'll depend on the context, as it always does with these things. Again, I have looked at some process improvement activity where there was a communication issue, and therefore looking at actually what we were focused on was looking at the consults and informs rather than the responsibles and the accountables. But again, just some basic good practices when doing this in Spark. Right. I did say I was going to show you an example, so I've got one here. So this is loosely based on some work. Actually, it's a bit of a combination of two different projects that we're involved in, and then simplified and genericized a little bit. But it was mainly based on a tech company who did some work with to look at building some new marketing capability in the organization. So I'm not going to go into all of this, but essentially a very high level process where we set the strategy for what we want to do. We're going to build a network of social media influencers. We're going to create and update content, and then we're going to communicate that content out through various channels. So again, you can see here at the very high level, we've got the roles with the A's. And then as I drill down into some of these, again, we've got more detailed views. So there are more roles with the A's on them. As I keep going down, eventually we'll get to a point where we're doing the roles and responsibilities. Just quickly, this is what I meant by the lowest level. So here, there's no more detailed view on this. So we put the roles and responsibilities, but this box does have a detailed view. So we'd go down one extra level and put the different roles and responsibilities on there. Now, once you've been through the processes and assigned roles and responsibilities, it's then where the reporting comes into its own. So the first thing we were looking to do is start to look at, just to get a sense of how often the roles are appearing on the process. So again, hopefully most of you will be familiar with this. You get the nice chart view there. Once you start using RACI or any of the other responsibility models, you will then also get these charts as well. So at the moment, I've opened the roles manager from this process. So it's going to be filtered specifically on this process. It's only looking at roles on this process, and that will be the same for all of the charts. So the first RACI chart here is just telling me how many times each of the different responsibility levels have been identified on this particular process. Not a huge surprise here. I think probably looking at this, I would always expect the R's to be higher than the A's. looking at this, I get the sort of sense that the A's are probably still, there's probably too many, but it's entirely contextual. A lot of these charts in Spark are all just about helping you ask more questions and dig into the process in more detail. So I wouldn't feel too strongly about that. Now, the next set of charts are a breakdown of the individual responsibility levels, and these are really useful. So in this context, this specific example, essentially when we were putting this together, what we were the view was that this work was predominantly going to be broken into two main teams. There were going to be a couple of other teams, but a marketing team and a product marketing team, essentially. And what we did is we mapped the processes to do the work, and then we went through step by step in the process and assigned the roles and responsibilities. Then when we came to look at the charts, actually, when we did this originally, we did it with spreadsheets because we didn't have this capability. But we did exactly the same thing. And what this told us is we've got these outliers here. So here we've got the marketing manager, so for both the responsible and the accountable. And you can see this is way more than everybody else in here. And as I said, if we look at in the responsible, the second one on here is the product marketing manager. And in the accountable, I think the product marketing manager ends up quite far down here, quite far along. So as I said, the idea was that the work was going to be roughly balanced between the two, but you can see it was quite out of balance. And what that did is that gave us the opportunity to go back and start to look at some of those activities. And really, we were asking way too much of the marketing manager and not enough of the product marketing manager. Now, I haven't reflected it in this process, but essentially what we did is went through and had a re-review the processes and actually identified work where it probably didn't make as much sense as we thought the first time for the marketing manager, and then reassigned that to the product marketing manager. I suppose just the one note on this is, remember, this is not about the amount of work that they're doing. It's just the amount of times they've been assigned this responsibility level. So you don't expect them to be perfectly balanced. It's not like saying there's X number of hours in a week and therefore each person's doing it. It's just the number of times they've been attributed to a particular responsibility level. But you would expect a lot more balance than what we've got here. So that was a really useful exercise for us to go through. Ultimately, what we then wanted to do once we'd done that exercise was then to go and look at the role description. Remember, down the left-hand side here, I can click on a particular role, and it will then give me a role description for that role. And again, in here, so you can see I've got 77 more activities that person is doing, and then you can see they'll have the roles and responsibility tags against them. From here, I can open a report. Now, just a quick note on this. If I click the open report, what it will do is it will show me a report which is filtered specifically for this particular role, so for the marketing manager. Now, this view is quite useful because, as I said, it's filtered to that particular role. But if I do the download here, so hit the download to Excel, what that'll do is that's actually going to download the complete report. So it'll include all of the other roles within this process as well. So what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to bring that up so you can see it. Just switch sharing. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. That's the raw report that comes out of Spark. So it includes all of the data. You can see there's quite a lot of columns in here, all of the data that's associated with this process. So one thing just to note on here, when you get to the roles column, so every time an activity has multiple roles on it, we actually include all of them. So if I click on one of the cells there, you can see each of the roles associated. There is another column here, which is the responsible RACI role, and that one will give us a specific role per line. Okay, so you can see the marketing manager. Now, what I've done with this, I'm just going to quickly jump to it, is I've taken a copy. Basically, what I do is delete all the columns I don't need. And again, I'm just going to show you this example here. Delete all the columns that I don't need, and then turn that into a table. And then from here, once it's in as a table, I can then go, right, let me filter out and just have the marketing manager. So I can unselect all of those. And then now what it does, it gives me the marketing manager with all the different responsibility levels. Now for example, one of the things I might want to do is if I wanted to summarize what the role is, then I might want to say, okay, what are they accountable for? So I'll remove any of the blanks there. You'll see this returns the activities where they're accountable and responsible. So here, actually, I might just want to look at those boxes where they have the detailed view on, because I just want to look at the summary of the accountable. So here again, I'd filter and say just filter out all the R's, so I've only got the blanks, and then that gives me a good kind of overview of what that role would look like. Now, some of this might be duplicated, so you might find some of the same things here. You'll see create articles and press releases, and then you see that summarized there as well. So again, sometimes I can remove some of these steps in there, but it just then gives you a nice overview to provide a quick description of what the accountabilities might be for that particular role. And you could do the same by filtering on the responsible tag as well to come up with the responsibilities.